You're standing at the edge of a clearing. In front of you is a dead wolf, killed less than an hour ago by your own hunting party. It took 3 grown men, 2 spears, and a wound to one hunter's thigh that's still bleeding through a wrapped hide. The wolf weighs maybe 40 kilograms. Lean muscle, tough sinew, a body built entirely for chasing things down. And here's what happens next. Nobody butchers it for food. The pelt comes off carefully because wolf fur is valuable for the cold months ahead. The teeth might get pulled for ornaments, but the meat, all 40 kilograms of muscle and organs sitting right there, gets left in the clearing. Your group walks away hungry, back toward camp, back toward a completely different animal they'll hunt tomorrow. A deer, a bison, something that spends its whole life quietly eating grass. This happened, not once, not in one culture, but as a pattern, repeated across nearly every hunter-gatherer society ever studied, on nearly every continent, across tens of thousands of years, among groups that had zero contact with each other and no way to share the idea. Somehow they all landed on the same unspoken rule: hunt the plant eaters, leave the meat eaters alone. Now, your first instinct is probably the obvious one. Predators are dangerous. Of course, ancient humans avoided them. Case closed. Except that explanation falls apart almost immediately once you look at what ancient humans actually did hunt. Mammoths, cave bears on occasion, aurochs, an animal so aggressive it was still being described as nearly untamable thousands of years later. Danger clearly wasn't a deal breaker on its own. Ancient humans walked toward terrifying animals all the time when the payoff was worth it. So if fear alone doesn't explain this pattern, something else has to. And it turns out the real answer is a tangle of biology, math, and risk calculation so consistent that it starts to look less like culture and more like a law of nature. Let's start with the reason that quietly explains almost everything else: energy. Every time energy moves up one level of a food chain, plant to herbivore, herbivore to predator, most of it simply disappears. Roughly 90% of the energy stored in a herbivore's body gets burned off before a predator ever eats it. Metabolism, movement, body heat, the basic cost of staying alive and hunting for a living. Only about 10% actually converts into the predator's own body mass, which means a wolf, a big cat, a hyena, any of them is essentially a diluted package of energy that already passed through another animal first. A deer, by comparison, is close to the source. Direct sunlight, turned into plants, turned straight into muscle and fat with nothing skimmed off the top. If you're an ancient hunter weighing effort against reward, a deer is simply a richer meal for the same amount of work. Pound for pound, chasing a predator means chasing an animal that's already burned off most of the calories you're hoping to collect. The math doesn't favor it. And ancient humans didn't need to understand thermodynamics to feel that math play out, hunt after hunt, generation after generation, until the smarter choice looked less like a decision and more like instinct. But energy math alone doesn't fully explain it, because there's a second problem sitting right underneath it: predators are rare. That same 90% energy loss that makes predator meat a poor caloric deal also means an ecosystem can only support a small number of predators relative to the herbivores beneath them. A single stretch of land might hold thousands of deer, aurochs, or horses, and only a handful of wolves or big cats feeding on all of them combined. So even if a group decided predator meat was worth chasing, there simply weren't enough predators around to build a survival strategy on. You can't feed 18 people for a season on an animal that only exists in small, scattered numbers across a huge territory. Trying to would mean walking further, searching longer, and coming home empty-handed far more often than not. It's the ecological equivalent of trying to live off the rarest item on the menu instead of the one sitting in front of you in abundance. And then there's the part of the equation danger actually does play, not as the whole explanation, but as the multiplier that makes everything else worse. A deer's entire defense strategy is running away, maybe a kick or a set of antlers if it's cornered. A predator's entire existence, every day of its life, is built around the opposite skill: closing distance on something and taking it down. Claws, speed, teeth, and, critically, experience. It has spent its whole life practicing exactly the kind of close-range violence a hunting party is about to walk into. Killing a wolf or a big cat isn't like killing a deer from a safe throwing distance. It means getting close enough, again and again, to land a killing blow on an animal that fights back with everything it has, especially once it's wounded and cornered rather than caught by surprise. A wounded predator is often more dangerous than an unwounded one. Pain and adrenaline make it faster, more aggressive, and far less predictable, and a group that's just spent everything it had cornering the animal is now facing its most dangerous version at the closest possible range. And the cost of that danger doesn't end the moment the animal drops. Even a successful hunt can leave a hunter with deep lacerations, broken bones, or wounds that, with no antibiotics, no stitches beyond sinew and hide, carry a real risk of infection and permanent disability. In a group of 15 or 20 people where every able-bodied adult is doing essential work every single day, gathering, tracking, caring for children, maintaining the fire, losing someone to a slow, infected recovery isn't a minor setback. It's a catastrophic loss the whole group absorbs for weeks or months, if that person survives at all. So stack it up, a smaller caloric reward, from a smaller pool of available animals, that comes wrapped in significantly higher physical risk, with consequences that could ripple through the entire group long after the hunt itself was over. Even before biology enters the picture, the basic risk-to-reward math was already stacked hard against hunting predators as a food source. And biology, as it turns out, was about to make that math even worse. So far, everything has been math you could work out in your head: energy, scarcity, risk. But the next reason is one ancient humans couldn't see or calculate. They could only learn it the hard way, over and over, until the lesson became a rule nobody questioned. It starts with something called biomagnification. As certain compounds move up a food chain, fat-soluble vitamins, environmental toxins, whatever happens to be circulating in a landscape, they don't stay at a steady level. They concentrate. A plant holds a small amount of a compound. The animal that eats a lot of that plant ends up with more of it stored in its tissue. And the predator that's been eating many of those animals, over years, ends up with the most concentrated dose of all, layered on top of itself meal after meal. Nowhere is this more dangerous than in the liver. Predator livers, especially those of large, long-lived carnivores, can store extraordinarily high concentrations of vitamin A, as retinol. Eat even a modest portion, and you're looking at hypervitaminosis A, violent headaches, nausea, skin peeling off in sheets, bone pain, blurred vision, and in serious cases, death. This isn't theoretical. Arctic explorers in more recent history learned this the hard way, some fatally, after eating polar bear or husky liver without knowing why it made them so sick. Indigenous Arctic peoples, who'd accumulated generations of close observation of local animals, held specific, absolute rules against eating the livers of top predators. Knowledge earned the same way ancient humans likely earned it everywhere. Someone got sick, someone possibly died, and the group remembered. Then there's what's crawling around inside the meat itself, whether you can see it or not. Predators carry a fundamentally different parasite load than herbivores do. Tapeworms, roundworms, and organisms specifically adapted to live inside carnivore hosts, some capable of establishing themselves in a human body too. Ancient humans had no germ theory, no understanding of parasite life cycles, and no reliable way to hit the exact cooking temperature needed to kill everything hiding in a piece of meat. What they had instead was memory. Someone eats predator meat, gets violently sick weeks later, and even without understanding why, the group starts avoiding it. This is a documented phenomenon called conditioned taste aversion. One bad experience is often enough to produce a lasting, almost automatic avoidance, one that gets passed down long after anyone remembers the original reason. And even setting toxins and parasites aside, predator meat simply isn't good meat. A herbivore spends its life calmly grazing, converting surplus food into stored fat, exactly the dense, calorie-rich resource an ancient human body craved. A predator spends its life doing the opposite, chasing, fighting, sprinting in short violent bursts, burning through its own reserves rather than storing them. The result is meat that's leaner, tougher, and stringier, without the fat that made herbivore meat so valuable. Relying on lean predator meat too heavily even carries its own risk, a documented condition called rabbit starvation, where the body can't safely process protein without enough fat to balance it. Put together, this is the invisible half of the equation. A food source that could poison you, infect you, and still leave you undernourished even if you ate your fill of it. There's one more layer to this, and it has nothing to do with calories, danger, or toxins. It's the reason predator kills didn't just get left behind, they got treated differently, on purpose, in ways that show up clearly in the archaeological and cultural record. Start with ecology. A predator population isn't just a hazard sitting on the landscape, it's doing work. Wolves and big cats overwhelmingly target the old, the sick, the injured, and the weak among prey herds, because those are the easiest animals to catch. In doing that, they're constantly removing the individuals most likely to spread disease or pass on weakness to the next generation. Ancient humans hunting the same herds were, in a sense, sharing that job with the predators around them, competitors, yes, but also working the same ecosystem toward the same result: healthier, more productive prey populations. Wipe out the predators entirely, and that balance shifts. Herds may grow in the short term, but they become sicker and less stable over time. A group that depended on those herds for survival had every practical reason not to eliminate the animals doing that quiet maintenance work for them. Then there's the part that's harder to measure but shows up again and again across cultures with no contact with each other. Predators occupied a completely different symbolic category than prey. Cave paintings across Europe are full of lions and bears rendered with a level of attention and reverence rarely given to horses or deer. Burial sites include predator teeth and claws as ornaments, not offhand tools. In hunter-gatherer societies studied more recently, prey animals are consumed and their killing is folded into everyday ritual, a portion offered, bones disposed of a certain way. Predators are treated differently, respected, sometimes feared, sometimes seen as carrying a kind of power distinct from any other animal on the landscape. Eating something implies dominance over it in a way that didn't fit how these groups related to an animal they saw as a rival, a threat, and sometimes almost a person. Taking the hide was an act of claiming that power. Eating the meat wasn't. None of this means the rule was absolute. Bears, fattened up before hibernation, carried enough stored fat to make an exception worth it, solving the leanness problem that made most predator meat unappealing in the first place. Coastal groups hunted seals and sharks, where the energy math simply worked out differently than it did on land. And during real famine, when herds vanished or crashed, predator meat became exactly what it always technically was: 40 kilograms of edible protein, better than nothing, danger and all. So go back to that wolf in the clearing. The hide comes off. The teeth get kept. The meat stays behind for the ravens and the wolves that will finish the job within days. It wasn't fear, and it wasn't waste. It was the accumulated result of energy math, scarcity, physical risk, invisible biology, ecological logic, and cultural meaning, all quietly pointing toward the same answer, worked out independently by people who never spoke to each other, across tens of thousands of years. They didn't need a word for any of it. They just knew, because the ones who didn't know, didn't survive to pass the lesson on.